Excerpt from That Time I Died, An Extraordinary Journey Beyond the Veil of Life and Death by Thomas Gates. Chapter 28, Understanding the Sense of Loss. Even when we understand the greater reality of the eternity of being, it is most important that we fully honor our true feelings as they arise. Why do we feel such a sense of loss, sorrow, and grief when a loved one passes on? It is never easy to experience such a profound loss, but this is rarely ever a question that we would ask in those emotionally difficult moments. It may be a question we might later consider, or not, as we move deeper into our own unique journey of healing. For those who may now be willing to delve more deeply into this question, I hope to share a perspective from my own journey that may potentially provide greater peace and understanding. So what could be the underlying source of this overpowering sense of loss and grief? We mostly identify ourselves and others by what we do, think, eat, wear, and drive, by our jobs, religious beliefs, philosophies, intellect, humor, and our physical appearances. The list goes on and on. These are just the outward characteristics and expressions of who we're being in this world. Again, all this is not the definition of what we actually are. However, this seems to be the general manner of how we define and relate to one another as human beings. It may therefore be the primary basis for our own fear of death. What if all those qualities are taken away, as in death? What would be left? Isn't that person then forever gone from our lives? Aren't we then truly separate from them? Does he or she still exist somewhere? What exactly is it that we mourn the loss of? We have heard from my own experiences and from those of countless others who have gone through the death experience or near-death experience that there's much more to all of us than meets the eye. When we leave this mortal body and all of its more densely manifested qualities, we find that we continue to create, perceive, and experience, albeit a much more refined level of perception and experience, which is nevertheless still experienced through that same individual consciousness that previously occupied the now deceased body. We cannot truly be separated by the physical boundaries, at least as I have come to experience and understand. Every aspect of creation is eternally connected by that same underlying silent source that gave rise to us and all the creation. In fact, the physical boundaries that appear to separate us from one another and from the rest of our perceived creation are sometimes just a bridge to the illusion of separateness. Again, it is not only entirely possible to simultaneously experience the underlying unified value of wholeness along with the uniquely expressed values of the individual boundaries. It is ultimately our divine purpose and birthright as human beings. So the sense of loss we feel is really about the loss of all the familiar qualities and attributes of our loved ones that we have come to identify them as being. Yes, they have ceased being expressed through those qualities and attributes, but they have not ceased to be. They can never not be, therefore can never truly be separate. If we consider this as a possibility of the reality of death and the eternal nature of the soul, we have the opportunity to more graciously move through the bereavement process in a way that can ease our level of suffering. We can more effectively be there for others who may not have come to the same realizations about death, to help support them through their own healing process as well. However, even when we understand the greater reality of the eternity of being, whether through a simple faith or through direct experience, it is most important that we fully honor our true feelings as they arise. It is not helpful to resist any feelings of sorrow or to pretend that we are not deeply affected by this kind of loss. To do so would only hinder our full healing and therefore unnecessarily prolong any suffering we may experience in our healing process. Even a great saint mourns the loss of his or her beloved teacher. Likewise, it is also important to move through the bereavement process and be willing to release ourselves from the pain and sorrow we have experienced during that time. It is a journey that should ultimately come to an end, at least in the healthiest of outcomes. It is a journey from which we can emerge with a greater appreciation for the life of our loved ones, but most importantly, one which can lead us towards a fuller understanding and experience of the eternal nature of all life. Letting go. I recall an experience I had during a presentation to a bereavement support group for individuals who had lost loved ones. There was a tradition to go around the room before the presentation began to allow each member to introduce themselves and state why they were there. Each briefly spoke about the circumstances of the death of their loved one and how it affected them. They also stated how long they had been members of the group. At first I was a bit surprised by how long some of them had been in the group, in some cases for several years. I thought about what an enormous burden it must have been to have carried the weight of such sorrow and remorse for so long, as well as the cost of the potential to move forward in their own lives. After the introductions, I began my presentation, which included an abbreviated version of my NDE, followed by a question and answer segment. Throughout this time, I gradually became aware of an increasingly subtle but steady change in the room. There was a growing feeling of lightness in the air and a more vibrant appearance in the faces of the members. However, there was one couple who had lost their son to suicide. They had been struggling many years with an overwhelming sense of guilt and remorse that they should have done more, that they should have done something more that could have prevented that tragedy from happening. And this is not an uncommon emotional response in these kinds of deaths. At this point, I shared with them the one thing their departed loved one would want to tell them if they could. I am sorry for any pain my actions may have caused you, but I am okay now. Please don't let my passing stop you from going on with your lives. Even though I am no longer with you in a physical form, I will always be with you. I will always be a part of you. The greatest gift you could give to me would be to let go of your sorrow and find renewed joy in your life. You deserve to have that now and always. By the end of my presentation and the Q&A segment, there was a palpable, vibrant liveliness that permeated the room. The overwhelming heaviness that had initially filled the room was completely gone. Everyone seemed to have been released from the tenacious grip of their sorrow long enough, hopefully, to come closer to their own emotional healing. Perhaps it was an opening to reclaim a part of themselves and their lives that had been shut down for so long. It was gratifying to see a sparkle return to their eyes that only an hour before had all but been extinguished by their grief. It is possible that we can have both a more enlightened understanding of death and the eternity of life, along with the natural human emotions we feel when dealing with the physical death of our loved ones. After all, we are human beings, living, learning, and evolving within a field of simultaneous unity and diversity, of boundaries and the unbounded, uniquely expressed values, supported, sustained, and permeated by one essence. There is life, and there is life, all sustained by the underlying, unmanifest source that gives rise to it all.